Unwieldy Radiance of Spirit, Flannery O'Connor. Remembered by Catherine Ann Porter.
Catherine Ann Porter was a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer who phoned this tribute from her sickbed, sharing her unrehearsed thoughts with the editor of a memorial book honoring Flannery O'Connor. Though necessarily brief and conversational, it conveys Porter's admiration for O'Connor's genius, her spirit, and her Catholic faith, which Porter shared. O'Connor's father died when she was 15 of a disease that would also one day claim her life. She was diagnosed with lupus at age 26, and her first novel was published the next year. She struggled as a novelist, short story writer, and essayist while living in a small Georgia town with her mother in a huge collection of exotic and ordinary birds. She communicated by letter with countless friends and fellow writers until her death at age 39. O'Connor's fiction portrayed lost and often grotesque individuals touched by divine grace. Her stories, set in the Bible Belt where she lived, dealt with questions of morality and grace. Her comic sensibility and realistic view of humanity was distinctive, prohibiting the preachiness or sentimentality often found in other writing of her era that dealt with religious themes. She was the first fiction writer born in the 20th century to have her collected works published by the Library of America. She also reviewed over 100 books for Georgia diocesan newspapers and gave talks on how faith can inform one's writing. Here is author Catherine Ann Porter's tribute to her friend and colleague, which appeared in a booklet honoring the memory of Flannery O'Connor in 1964.
I saw our lovely and gifted Flannery O'Connor only 3 times over a period, I think, of 3 years or more, but each meeting was spontaneously an occasion, and I want to write about her just as she impressed me. I want to tell what she looked like and how she carried herself and how she sounded, standing balanced lightly on her aluminum crutches, whistling to her peacocks who came floating and rustling to her, calling in their rusty voices. I don't want to speak of her work because we all know what it was, and we don't need to say what we think about it, but to read and understand what she was trying to tell us. Now and again there hovers, on the margin of the future, a presence that one feels as imminent, if I may use stylish vocabulary. She came up among us like a presence, a carrier of a gift not to be disputed, but welcomed. She lived among us like a presence and went away early, leaving her harvest, perhaps not yet altogether gathered, though like so many geniuses who have a small time in this world, I think she had her warning and accepted it and did her work, even if we all would like to have had her stay on forever and do more. It is all very well for those who are left to console themselves. She said what she had to say. I'm pretty certain that her work was finished. We shouldn't mourn for her, but ourselves and our loves. After all, I saw her just twice. Memory has counted at 3. For the second time was a day-long affair at a conference and a party given by Flannery's mother in the evening. And I want to tell you something I think is amusing, because Flannery lived in such an old-fashioned Southern village, very celebrated in Southern history on account of what took place during the Civil War. But in the lovely, old, airy, tall country house, and the life of a young girl living with her mother in a country town, so that there was almost no way for her knowing the difficulties of human beings, and her general knowledge of this was really very impressive, because she was so very young, and you wondered how she had learned all that. But this is a question that everybody always asks himself about genius. I want to just tell something to illustrate the Southern custom. Ladies in society there, that particular society, were nearly always known, no matter if they were married once or twice. They were known to their dying day by their maiden names. They were called Miss Mary or whoever it was. And so Flannery's mother, too, her maiden name was Regina Klein, and so she was still known as Miss Regina Klein. And one evening at a party when I was there after the conference, someone mentioned Flannery's name, and another, a neighbor, mind you, who had probably been around there all her life, said, "Who is Flannery O'Connor? I keep hearing about her." The other one said, "Oh, you know, why that's Regina Klein's daughter, that little girl who writes." And that was the atmosphere in which her genius developed, and her life was lived, and her work was done. I myself think it was a very healthy, good atmosphere because nobody got in her way. Nobody tried to interfere with her or direct her, and she lived easily and simply in her own atmosphere and her own way of thinking. I believe this is the best possible way for a genius to live. I think they're too often tortured by this world, and when people discover that someone has a gift, they all come with their claws out, trying to snatch something of it, trying to share something they have no right even to touch. And she was safe from that. She had a mother who really took care of her, and I just think that's something we ought to mention, ought to speak of. She managed to mix, somehow, two very different kinds of chickens and produced a bird hitherto unseen in this world. I asked her if she were going to send it to the county fair. "I might, but first I must find a name for it. You name it," she said. I thought of it many times, but no fitting name for that creature ever occurred to me. And no fitting word now occurs to me to describe her stories, her particular style, her view of life. But I know its greatness, and I see it, and see that it was one of the great gifts of our times. I want to speak a little of her religious life, though it was very sacred and quiet. She was as reserved about it as any saint. When I first met her, she and her mother were about to go for a 17-day trip to Lourdes. I said, "How I wish I could go with you." She said, "I wish you could, but I'll write you a letter." She never wrote that letter. She just sent a postcard, and she wrote, "The sight of faith and affliction joined in prayer. Very impressive." That was all. In some newspaper notice of her death, mention of her portrait with her favorite peacock was made. It spoke of her plain features. She had unusual features, but they were anything but plain. I saw that portrait in her home, and she had not flattered herself. The portrait does have her features, in a way, but here's something else. She had a young softness and gentleness of face and expression, the look, something in the depth of the eyes and the fixed mouth. The whole pose, fiercely intent, gives an uncompromising glimpse of her character, something you might not see on first or even second glance in that tenderly, fresh-colored, young, smiling face, something she saw in herself, knew about herself, that she was trying to tell us in a way less personal yet more vivid than words. The portrait, I'm trying to say, looked like the girl who wrote those blood-curdling stories about human evil, not the living Flannery, whistling to her peacocks, showing off her delightfully freakish breed of chickens. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you about the Flannery O'Connor I know. I loved and valued dearly her work and her strange, unworldly radiance of spirit in a human being so intelligent and so undeceived by the appearance of things. I would feel too badly if I did not honor myself by saying a word in her honor. It is a great loss.